Dungeons & Dragons is the pinnacle of fantastical tabletop RPG adventuring without question. New to the Dungeons & Dragon world at least, developers Larian Studios are opening the gate a third time in this unforgettable realm, dropping the more complex AD&D rules set the original Baldur's Gate title used from 98 Origins to the early 2000s. Powered by their own Divinity 4 engine, supporting dual APIs in DirectX 11 and Vulkan, a vast cast of characters and stories to tell, 4-clan multiplayer and groundbreaking split-screen co-op, and more. So let's roll the IGN performance review dice and see if the numbers equal success. As a deep, evolving and branching game based on your actions affecting how and what happens within, the gigantic challenge this presents on narrative, animation, assets, etc. needs to be taken into account within the technical areas of the game. Systemic game systems, procedural animation, dynamic AI, and billions of pages of text all support this vast ensemble of creatures and characters, which means the refined cutscenes, motion captured animation, performance captured dialogue are simply not possible. Do expect some robotic motion, lip syncing, glitches, jumps, and some rough edges during many moments of play, but it really does come with the territory here. That said, the visual quality, materials, lighting and effects and dynamic nature of the game do still impress and are certainly a big step up over their prior games. Even at 1440p, the image is sharp thanks to a selection of anti-aliasing options and upscaling choices within the menu. Nvidia players get the best with DLSS 2 and DLAA, which can be chosen independently of each other. AMD and Intel players lose out here though, but can at least choose SMAA or TAA as your AA of choice, alongside FSR1 spatial upscaling, which is no comparison to DLSS 2, as you would assume. And it's a shame really, and a surprise that FSR2 is not included. As an Nvidia sponsored title, it may be related, maybe not, but I do hope it is added in later to expand those reconstruction options for older and non-Nvidia players alike. But FSR1 does require anti-aliasing to be added on top, which is of worthy note as you can turn it off by accident in the menu when changing between these, and it'll leave the game looking very unstable even at 4K. You have been warned.
I'm gonna bite the heads off your kids, and your birdies, and your dogs!
In regards to the engine itself, it uses PBR materials and lighting with subsurface scattering on skin, and even mushrooms, diffuse and specular surfaces all react well under a variety of light sources, and the game is very vibrant with good assets, textures, and overall a strong art design throughout. The menu itself is not swamped with options, but the visual guides on many selections are welcome, with a written summary for all, including those with or without pictures. These do help many though to make the right choice. A picture is worth 1,000 words and all that. But much of the detail in the game comes from the normal maps and the high resolution textures for faces, clothes, buildings, rocks and more. This does add a lived in and vibrant world to roam and battle within, and character design and models are very good, with particularly good hair quality with a variety of geometry cards. As a key aspect of any RPG worth its salt, you want to ensure you can tailor your avatar to have more bites than bark, and it is in the cinematics and the character selection screen that you can really appreciate the quality across all of them, from the head right down to the, well, moving on. The textures are strong across the game, and although MIP streaming and loading issues did crop up across all my tested hardware, due to the nature and turn-based combat of the game, it was never a real problem outside of the real-time cinematics, where it is noticed the most, but more so on lower-end hardware. The game does benefit from a higher resolution due to the fine details in textures, hair, and the high frequency use across the game's display. In comparison of all options on PC, unsurprisingly, DLAA comes out on top at the biggest performance penalty of 4K resolutions, but stability and detail are pin sharp. The next rung down is DLSS 2 quality mode, which although a 1440p base, it can look sharper and more stable than the game running at 4K TAA, but it offers up a huge performance boost over that mode and DLAA of 42 and 54% respectively. In between these comes FSR1 Ultra Quality with TAA enabled, which although it has slightly worse IQ than DLSS quality and a small 8% performance cost over that mode, it does improve over native 4K due to the sharpness of the image and 31% better performance due to its 2954 by 1662 base output. The sharpening options can be tweaked in the menu, but AMD CAS sharpening can only be applied when DLSS or FSR1 is disabled. Moving through the settings, we do not really see huge impacts to image quality and details in general until medium and low. The impact between ultra and high is mostly textures, fog volumes and clouds, with other options of bloom, depth of field quality and subsurface scattering being areas to tweak if you need that GPU performance back. As you move down the scale, high to medium is mostly shadows and clutter in the world, with the biggest gaps coming from medium to low, with stark reductions in shadow, object triangle count, ambient occlusion, textures and world density. As such, as long as you keep textures, model details, shadows at medium and ambient occlusion on, the cost versus visual impact is more than worth it when GPU constrained. As my Steam Deck optimized settings here show, these are also perfect for all low to medium GPUs, with the extra grunt used to bump up resolution on top of that if you have it. As you see here with some comparisons between PC's Ultra at 4K and FSR1 1080p, on the Steam Deck optimized settings, the trade-off can be hard to notice at times, and it certainly pays off in performance, although not all hits in that area are GPU related. Based on my RTX 2070, then 4K DLSS quality at high is good enough most of the time for a close 60 FPS level, outside of heavy NPC swamp battles which can impact CPU, or 1800p Ultra if you want the finest effects with close to 60 FPS as possible. On more powerful hardware in my RX 6800 with a Zen 5600X, we can go to 4K FSR1 Ultra Quality Max settings and keep a lock on that 60 FPS more often, even during CPU heavy moments due to the extra IPC and clock speeds it has, even with 2 less cores. Vulkan is better than DirectX 11 on average due to better CPU and GPU utilization in my tests shown here. Even in CPU bound sections, as here with my 2700X, we can see between 8 and 10% better performance in Vulkan's favour. However, I recommend DirectX 11 for NVIDIA players specifically, as it crashed often on my RTX machine, and even AMD players get a better delivery of Vulkan, but it still crashed a few times for me to not recommend it, and it caused many bugs on the Steam Deck when forced on. The team have noted that Vulkan is still in its beta state, so once these driver issues are ironed out, it would likely be the recommended API for all PC players. Now, the Steam Deck represents the low end, obviously, but loses none of the brilliance and quality Larian have produced here. Using my optimized settings, you can cap at 30 FPS and most of the time stay above that level to never feel bad. However, turning on TAA has a small but noticeable impact to performance of around 6%, which can be enough to cause GPU drops under that 30 FPS target. Using SMAA or dropping FSR1 down to performance can claw some of that back, but in handheld mode on an 800p screen, I preferred the sharper but less stable TAA off option at the higher resolution it offers, as it does not stand out as much in your hand. The game will stutter at times though, and just as it does on high-end PC, these are CPU and memory related. During the bigger NPC battles, do expect some 50 to 100 millisecond stutters between turns as the engine processes the next moves of the NPCs, but it can also have memory streaming hits across the world as you walk into new areas. This happens even on higher end hardware, but it is reduced the more powerful your CPU and memory is. As is always the case with a logic-heavy dynamic game like this, CPU demands are high, and being DirectX 11 really at the moment, this means it can become single-thread bound at times due to the main worker render thread holding up the other cores, although it does make good utilization of multiple cores, but it can occur from time to time.
You are my thrall. Blackett blesses me this day. Together.
One one big talking point of the game is the complete local co-op split screen mode that accompanies the online 4-player clans. On PC, this is accessed simply by connecting 2 controllers. You can't use keyboard with this, and at any time during the game you can then join in and even create a new member as you do. Be aware though, the cost of this is very high, as the game is running the entire game logic and rendering twice, as there are no limits on what you can both do during split screen, which means dual cutscenes, battles and exploration are possible. If you are in the same area, then cutscenes run full screen, but if not, they remain split. Using my 2070 as an example, 4K DLSS quality maximum loses 51% of its performance, showing that the dual screens require 2 times the performance. Quelle surprise. Dropping down to 1080p DLSS quality returns us most of that impact, but even here do expect the demands at times to push it down to the 30s. As such, I recommend that unless you have the highest end hardware, you target 30 FPS and then increase the resolution as much as possible. The technical achievement and sheer amount of data management and memory demands here are worthy of exceptional praise indeed. This is not like a split screen racer, as the game is running twice for all intents and purposes, and even during 2 hours of dual play on both my RX 6800 and RTX 2070, it never crashed once, so long as you're in DX11 mode.
And hang you by your guts. They'll peel your face off and nail it to a wall.
Now, the team have been very honest on the impact this mode has had on the Series S version, with it causing a delay on the Xbox release, as noted on their site blog. Using the Steam Deck, which also has this option disabled, but you can enable it with a small command, which I do not recommend, but I have done here for testing, and the cost is as large as they stated. We can see the performance in this mode is completely memory bound in bandwidth and footprint. During the battle, the game locks at 20 FPS or lower due to the double buffered frame rate it has, as triple buffering would help out, but it takes even more memory, which it doesn't have in this handheld device. Even in small tests here, you can see the VRAM and system RAM heaps actually exceed the 16GB total RAM the machine has, which means SSD page swapping is being used, which is terrible for performance. Now, outside of this, the CPU and GPU demands, even at 720p FSR1, are too much to manage anything close to playable rates, and it demonstrates the issues the team are having with the Series S version. Recall the console has less RAM than the Steam Deck, with 10GB total and only 8GB available to the game, which is split between VRAM, the lion's share, and the game itself. Now, using the PC with split screen enabled only at 1080p, which is likely higher than the Series S will run in this mode anyway, upon boot up the game uses just under 5GB of system RAM and just over 5GB of VRAM. This itself is exceeding the level of the Series S in total, but the console has an advantage in that it does not require dual pools of data to be shared between system RAM and VRAM. So if we assume that some reductions on that footprint can be made on Series S, it will still hover close to that 8GB total. However, playing the game for short periods of time, splitting up, this increases that load to just under 13GB for the game and the GPU RAM, which means across both pools it's using around 13GB, and even if they can cut 35% of that total budget on console, it would still exceed the 8GB total it has. But this is not the only issue they have though. Bandwidth demands are very high here. The 480p Steam Deck version here, with approximately 88GB of bandwidth, is often in the teens and single digits. The Series S has approximately 2.5 times that bandwidth, which means, all things being equal, it would have similar performance levels as you see here at only 1440p by 810. This is not an exhaustive test by any means, but it does show that the DX11 path the consoles will use and the memory footprint of the S, they do need far more optimization to get this to work at playable levels, and these Steam Deck and PC tests reinforce that. The team are committed to getting the game working, and hopefully Series S and X players who aren't impacted by this issue can get hands on the title later this year or early next, and PlayStation 5 players get to play it next month.
Madness, Korga. She's just a
what, Wrath? A thief? A poison? A threat?
The final test before I wrap up all things here is the fact that loading, being a DX11 title, even with an SSD, is heavily CPU related due to the fact it's likely not using multiple cores to decompress the data. Here we see the PC runs at 33 seconds and 1 minute 9 using the Steam Deck, both on SSDs, and that's because of the far weaker CPU and bandwidth of the Steam Deck, so just be aware that the game does have some long loading times throughout. So, Baldur's Gate 3 is, in my opinion, the pinnacle of the Dungeons & Dragons genre. It's a shame the advanced Dungeons & Dragons rules were not included, even if it was an option, but the complexity to add that would be very large, I am fully aware. That said, the game really delivers on the imagination we had as kids playing on the tabletop cards and miniatures we brought to life in our own heads. Yes, the game has come out of early access, but it still has a few bugs and issues and glitches, as I mentioned, but it really is part and parcel of a game that's heavily dynamic and data-driven as this. The fact that the only reconstruction technique is DLSS 2, with FSR 1 being okay, but certainly not up with FSR 2, means AMD, Intel and older Nvidia players lose out. So hopefully this is something the team can add later, with lots of patches coming even during its review period. I'm sure that the single player and split screen will all benefit from these updates. Fundamentally though, if you are on the lookout for a new Dungeons & Dragons game, then Baldur's Gate 3 is an absolute work of art. Visually very impressive and well constructed, with such a broad range of dynamic action and storytelling, it works exceptionally well. The music and voice acting is superb, and fundamentally this is a high quality product that has taken time and passion, and that is seen in every aspect of the title. From the Steam Deck right up to top-end PC, you will not be disappointed on the visuals, the sound and overall the enjoyment this game offers.